lesson is chapter 7, in the 7th grade book, chapter 1, lesson 6, and we are solving proportional relationships. So in the warm-up, it says Katie and some friends want to buy fruit smoothies. They go to the health food store that advertises a sale of 2 fruit smoothies for $5. Fill in the boxes and write a ratio that compares the cost of the number of fruit smoothies. So, looking up here at the rate, remember when we're looking at unit prices, the money always goes on top, right? So here, our rate will be what to what? $5 to 2 smoothies. Very good. Very good. Number 2 says, suppose Katie and her friends buy 6 smoothies. Complete the ratio that compares the cost of the number of fruit smoothies. So now, if I'm getting 6 smoothies, how much is that going to cost? $15. And the way we get that, right, very good. So we're going to multiply times 3 here to get 2 to 6. And if I multiply times 3 in the denominator, I have to do that in the numerator. Very good. So that's going to get us $15 for 6 smoothies. Got it? Now, is the cost proportional to the number of smoothies for 2 to 6 smoothies? So these are proportional because if we change them both to unit rates, then they will be equal. Another way here is that if you just do the division, because you remember fraction means divide, right? So if we do that division, if we do 5 divided by 2, that's going to give us 2.5. And if we have 15 divided by 6, that will also give us 2.5. So the values of the ratios are the same, so the cost is proportional to the number of smoothies. All right, so today we are going to write and solve proportions. Now, a proportion is an equation stating that 2 ratios or rates are equivalent. So just like what we worked on in the warm-up, the ratios that we looked at for the smoothies, those were equal ratios, right? Those were equal ratios because they had the same value, okay? Also, if we have, remember we were talking about if we have 2 ratios and they are equal, then the 2 ratios are proportional, right? Same thing here. If 2 ratios are proportional, that means they're equal. So if I set them in an equation equal to each other, that makes that whole thing a proportion. Okay? So a proportion is an equation that states that 2 ratios are equivalent. So for example, here we have 6/8 is equal to 3/4. Those are a set of equal ratios, so they form a proportion. Now, I want you to also write down the definition for cross products. Okay, so here, what cross products are is the product of the numerator of one fraction times the denominator of the other. So A times D is a cross product. And the numerator of this fraction, C, times the denominator of the other one, B, is also a cross product. So C times B are cross products. So when you multiply to get the cross products, okay, you're pretty much, this is what you're doing, you guys. We're cross multiplying, right? We are cross multiplying. Everybody look at my hands. We are cross multiplying, right? So when we cross multiply, we get cross products, right? Because the answer to a multiplication problem is a product, and that's the reason why they call it cross products. Is everybody clear with that? All right. So cross products are equal. Please make sure you write that down. cross products of any proportion are equal. That will help us when we are solving proportions. So here you see that if we are multiplying 3 times 8, that gives us 24. And 6 times 4, that also gives us 24. Those are cross products, and they are equal. When you have equal cross products, that means that the ratios are equal. And if the ratios are equal, then they form a proportion. So for example 1, it says here, after 2 hours, the air temperature had risen 7 degrees Fahrenheit. Write and solve a proportion to find the amount of time it will take this rate for the temperature to rise at an additional 13 degrees Fahrenheit. So here we are comparing, watch my hands again, we are comparing temperature to time. So if one ratio is temperature to time, the other ratio on the other side has to be temperature to time. Very good. It has to be the same. So temperature to time has to be equal to temperature to time. If I have temperature to time is equal to time over temperature, are those cross products going to be equal? No, they will not. Very good. So here, when we set up our proportion, it's temperature to time. So looking at the words again, the temperature is 7 and the time is 2 hours. So that's 7 to 2. Now it says, write and solve a proportion to find the amount of time it will take at this rate for the temperature to rise an additional 13 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's the temperature. Is that going to go in the numerator or the denominator? That's going to go in the numerator. So there's the 13, and it says find the amount of time. So that's the t, that's what we're solving for. Okay? And then we will cross multiply. Here, when we cross multiply, 13 times 2 is 26, and 7 times t is 7t. And now we just have a one-step equation, multiplication, that we solve by dividing. So we have 7t is equal to 26. We divide by 7 on both sides, and we get approximately 3.7. That will be 3.7 hours that it takes to rise an additional 13 degrees Fahrenheit. All right, so for example A, B, and C, we are solving these proportions, and we are going to solve them by cross multiplying. Okay, so when we cross multiply, you guys remember I like to draw my arrows, and I like to follow the arrows. Okay, so on one side we have 9 times 4, which is 36. And then on the other side we have x times 10, which is 10x. Very good. Now it's just a one-step equation. How do I get the x by itself? Divide by 10 on both sides. Very good. So here the 10s will cancel, and x is equal to 3.6. Very good. All right, so example B, we have 2 34ths is equal to 5 ninths. This is a proportion because we have two ratios in an equation that says that they are equal. Okay, so when I cross multiply, my cross products will be equal. So, all right, so we're going to cross multiply. So on one side we have 34 times 5, which is what? What is it? 170. 170, good. And then on the other side we have 2 times y, which is 2y. Now, how do I get the y by itself? Divide by 2. So we're going to divide by 2 there and divide by 2 there. So now those 2's cancel. Now y is by itself. And what is y equal to? 85. Very good. Example C, we have 7/3 is equal to n over 21. Again, we're going to solve by finding our cross products. So on one side, n times 3 is 3n. And then on the other side, 7 times 21 is 147. Good. Now, to get the n by itself, we will divide by 3. And what do you get? So n is equal to what? Very good. All right, for this example, it says if the ratio of type O to non-type O donors at a blood drive was 37 to 43, how many donors would be type O out of 300 donors? We are comparing the type O, right? The type O blood donors to the total number. Is everybody with me? Okay, so if I look at this original ratio here, this says 37 to 43. 37 to 43, where the 37 represents the type O people, right? The type O blood, right? The 43 represents the non-type O blood. I'm just going to write non-O. So here we have the type O blood, and over here we have the non-type O blood, right? If out of these people, 37 were type O and 43 were non-type O, how do I know how many were all together? You just add them together, right? So the total then would be what? 80. Would be 80. Is everybody clear with that? So we're comparing the type O donors to the total. It says, so the first ratio is going to be 37 to 80 because 37 is a type O. The total is 80. You see that? Then it says, how many donors would be type O out of 300 total donors? You see? So here, now we want to know how many would be type O. That's my variable, right? Out of 300 total. Does that make sense? Out of 300 total, that's where we get the 300. And then you just cross multiply to get your final answer. So this example says the ratio of 7th grade students to 8th grade students in a soccer league is 17 to 23. If there are 200 students in all, how many are in the 7th grade? So the important information we have here, we have 17 to 23, right? So 17 to 23. What does the 17 represent? The 7th grade. That's the 7th graders, right? What does the 23 represent? That represents the 8th graders. How do I know what number will represent both 7th and 8th graders? You add them together. Very good. So we're going to add these together to get our total. So that's going to be what? 40. Okay? So if I am setting up my ratio, and it's going to be, the question is, how many 7th graders are there if there are 200 students, right? So we are comparing 7th grade to total. Does that make sense? So it's 7th grade to total. So this is what my proportion will look like. So 7th grade to total is equal to 7th grade to total. This is what my proportion will look like. The first ratio that I'm going to put in here comes from this information right here. So, what's going to go in for 7? 17. And what's going to go in for total? 40. Very good. Is everybody clear how I got that? Now we're going to look at the rest of the question. It says, if there are 200 students in all, how many are 7th graders? So, where is that 200 going to go in my other ratio? In the numerator or the denominator? Very good. So that now is going to go in the denominator, and we're going to solve for how many of those are going to be 7th graders. So now, all we have to do to get that final answer, cross multiply. Very good. So, we're going to cross multiply. So on one side, x times 40 is 40x. And then we have 17 times 200, which is? Good, 3,400. And now, how do I get the x by itself? Perfect. On both sides. Very good. Now, those 40s will cancel, and x is now by itself. So how many 7th grade students are there if there are 200 in all? 85. Very good. So there's 85 7th grade students. So let's just say 7th graders. All right, so you can also use unit rates to write equations, write an equation expressing the relationship between two proportional quantities, okay? So for example 3, it says Olivia bought 6 containers of yogurt for $7.68. Write an equation relating the cost to the number of yogurts, okay? And how much would Olivia pay for 10 yogurts at this same rate? So what we're going to do here is we're going to write our original rate. So it's cost per yogurts, right? It costs $7.68 for 6 yogurts. What you're going to do is you're going to write it as a unit rate. So we're going to divide by 6 in the numerator and the denominator, and we end up with $1.28 for 1 container of yogurt. Is everybody with me? The question now is, how much is she going to pay for 10 yogurts? So the equation that we write is the cost is equal to $1.28 times how many yogurts she's going to buy. So once we write our equation, then we can solve for the 10 yogurts. So that's going to be $12.80 for 10 yogurts. All right, so in this last example, it says Olivia typed 2 pages in 15 minutes. Write an equation relating the number of minutes, M, to the number of pages typed, P. How long will it take her to type 10 pages at that rate? Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to write our original rate. Okay, what are we comparing? Pages to minutes. But if you look at the question, it says how long will it take her to type 10 pages in however many minutes, right? So we want to know 10 pages per 1 minute, right? So we're going to write pages per minute. Is that right? Okay. So, you guys, this is incorrect. It's not pages per minute. It's minutes per page, right? It's minutes per page. So, let's flip that around. So here is the correct. We're looking at minutes per page, because it says how long will it take her to type 10 pages. So it's minutes per page. Do you see that? All right. So for the first ratio, how many minutes is it? 15 minutes for 2 pages. Good. Now, we want to write that as a unit rate. So, how am I going to change that to a unit rate?
Divide by 2.
Divide by 2. Very good. So, we'll divide by 2 in the numerator and in the denominator. And that's going to give us what?
7.5 over 1.
Very good. So, 7.5 minutes for 1 page. Now, we want to write the equation for the number of pages and the number of minutes. Okay? So the equation that we're going to write is how many minutes is going to be 7.5 times the number of pages. Right? So there's how we write our equation. So 7.5 times the number of pages is going to be how long it takes her to type it. Does that make sense? So now we can substitute in 10 for P. You got that? So this is going to be M is equal to 7.5, 7.5 times 10. So the number of minutes is going to be equal to what? 75 minutes. It takes her 75 minutes to type 10 pages.